Greetings, friends, and welcome to the continuing study of the book of Revelation. We've had two sessions so far in which we've learned that the book of Revelation is a special type of book, not the only one of its kind, but a special type of book in which the revelation is given by visions. These visions are given in special symbolic language, and it's difficult for us to unravel the meanings of the symbolic language in some cases. We can get most of the picture in the book of Revelation, though, so we've been working on the meanings of that symbolic code language, so to speak, in the book of Revelation. In order to understand this kind of literature, this kind of book, we've had to study the traits of the collection of these books as a whole. They then shed some light on this particular book. We've seen when we've done this certain traits that we'll now review and add to so that we may proceed to the next problem. We've seen that these apocalyptic books give the message in visions instead of oracles, that they use symbolic language instead of plain language, and that they assume a later Jewish cosmology, which is a cosmic warfare cosmology, as over against a simpler cosmology which has God simply ruling over everything. Now we need to add two things to this. Whereas the classical prophets spoke a word to their own generation about their own present generation, apocalyptic prophecy is a word about the future. It's forecasting the future in some special way. Now, these classical prophets also forecast the future, but they do so in terms of consequences of behavior, and it's not a fixed future. What these prophets tell you is that if you continue your wicked ways, calamity is coming on the nation. But what these prophets do is to tell you about the scheme already fixed and not dependent upon anybody's repenting or doing anything about it, but an already fixed scheme about future events. Now we'll study this a little more, but connected in close connection with this, these classical prophets talk about history as ongoing. They don't see an end in history. They simply see an ongoing history, a lineal type history. But these prophets see the end of history, and they not only see that history is coming to an end, to inaugurate a whole new age, but they see that this end is very near. And that's what we're going to focus on now. The book of Revelation teaches that the end of history is coming in its own time, in the time of its author and its readers. Now, for us to understand that, we have to look at some passages, these passages in the book of Revelation itself. And we'll start by looking at the very beginning of the book of Revelation, the way it opens up, because several times in that very beginning we will see this note of urgency, this note of nearness of time. Let's turn now to the beginning, chapter 1, and let's read the way the book begins. The revelation, the apocalypse, of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants what must soon take place. Notice this word soon, what must soon take place. And he made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written therein, for the time is near. Now we've had this expressed twice. What must soon take place, and for the time is near. So we have to assume that whatever this prophecy is, it thinks of it in terms of something soon or something near in terms of time. Now that's characteristic of the assumptions behind the whole book. To see this in another place, let's turn now to the end of the book of Revelation, the very last chapter. There are some personal concluding remarks which are typical of this type of literature, and in those concluding remarks, in two different places, we can see again this note of urgency in which the time will be the end. The time of the end will be very near. So let's look now in chapter 22 at the end at the first of these two passages, verse 6 and 7. He said to me, "These words are trustworthy and true, and the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, has sent his angel to show to his servants what must soon take place." What must soon take place? Same as the beginning. "And behold," and now this is Jesus Christ talking, who is the author of this revelation, "and behold, I am coming soon." So the soonness here is stressed twice at the end as well. But now we can go to the very end of the book of Revelation, almost the very end and see that this is still the theme. From the beginning to the end, the book of Revelation is assuming that the events that it's talking about are going to happen soon, that the time is near. So at the end, we find as a kind of sign-off, he who testifies to these things, now that's Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, he who testifies to these things says, surely I am coming soon. That's the second coming, the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds. And here, that's an event which ends the present age and ends history and ushers in the new age. And he says here in the very end, I'm coming soon. Then the author of the book says, amen, so be it. Come, Lord Jesus. That is, come soon. So we have here, as a theme, running through the whole book from beginning to end, the explicit statements in the book that these events are to happen soon. They must soon take place. They're going to happen soon. But the way in which this is most strongly confirmed is by a study of the central figure in this book, the most puzzling one, and that's the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns. That's the beast that's to usher in the last days and to be defeated and sent into the pit or into the pool or into the underworld. What does this symbol stand for, the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns? Well, there's 2 places in the book where the reader is given the proper clues for understanding who this beast is. Part of these clues are in chapter 13 and part are in chapter 17. We'll study both these passages as clues for trying to see what the symbol of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns stands for. And I think when we finish, we'll have a reasonably clear picture of what that symbol stands for. Let's begin with chapter 13, at the beginning. I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, 10 diadems upon its horns, and a blasphemous name upon its heads. A blasphemous name, that is, a name against God. Whatever this stands for, it's a force or a power guilty of blasphemy. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and its feet like a bear's, and its mouth like a lion's mouth. Now those animals, the leopard, the bear, and the lion, are animals that feature in the prophecies of Daniel some 200 years earlier than this. This author is taking those same symbolic features, those same symbolic animals, and identifying them with this one beast who rises out of the sea. The sea is the source of all evil in ancient understandings. And this beast rises out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. Now when Daniel talked about this, he talked about 4 beasts rising out of the sea. But they used the same animal figures, and one of the beasts had 4 heads. So what we have in the book of Revelation is a reinterpretation of the book of Daniel's prophecies, combining the 4 animals of Daniel 7 into one animal with 7 heads. Then the symbolism of the leopard and the bear and the lion makes that connection very well. Now we'll go on with the text. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth, and to it the dragon gave his power and throne and great authority. Now that tells us that the dragon, which is Satan, is behind this beast. So the beast is operating on the authority of Satan. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. Now we need to remember that. That's an important clue. A mortal wound is healed. Of course, that doesn't make any sense. If it's a mortal wound and it's not healed, it dies. But this seemed to have a mortal wound, but this so-called mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth followed the beast with wonder. Men worshiped the dragon, that's Satan, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast. That is, the beast is a worship object, but the power behind the beast is a satanic power, an evil power. They worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? The beast, therefore, is very strong. It's impossible or it's fruitless to oppose it or to fight against it. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. This beast, whatever it stands for now, the one with the 7 heads and the 10 horns, this blasphemous, is uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. 42 months is 3.5 years. This is another half of 7 reference. We've seen 2 of these already in an earlier study. It stands for some kind of short time period, but exactly how long we can't be sure. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming His name and His dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. The saints is a name for Christians, and so the beast is making war on the saints, that is, it's persecuting the Christians, and conquering is a special code name for martyrdom. So it means that the saints are not just being persecuted, they're being put to death. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. Now the beast is ruling over all the nations, and all who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. That book of life reference we already ran into. It's in several places in the book of Revelation. It's a kind of foreordained list of those who are to be saved, those are the righteous. Now when we look at this picture that's been given to us so far in chapter 13, we have a picture of a force ruling the nations, a blasphemous force, very powerful, satanic, putting the saints to death, persecuting the saints, making war on the saints, and uttering haughty and blasphemous words. Those are clues that are given to the reader so the reader can understand who the beast is. Now we'll continue in chapter 13 with some more of these clues. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone slays with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Now this little section doesn't have anything to do with the identity of the beast, but it has to do with a very important theme that we'll be dealing with in our last session. That is, the nature of this book and the purpose of it is to encourage those in persecution. It encourages those in persecution by telling them that no matter how bad the present seems to be, in the long run, the good side will win, and God will win, and they will therefore be well advised, stay loyal to the good, so that when the good wins the cosmic war finally, they will be on the right side. It's a call for stamina, for encouragement to the saints. But that doesn't help us with the identity of the beast yet. That's a little passage, though, that we will develop in our study in our next session. Now let's go back to try to solve the mystery of the beast. Then I saw another beast which rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. We're not going to try to figure out that one. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. It's apparently some kind of a subordinate official that makes the inhabitants worship the beast. And then there's another reference to that mortal wound that was healed. Very strange kind of thing, puzzling. It works great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of men. And by the signs which it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, bidding them make an image for the beast, which was wounded by the sword and yet lived. There's a third reference to that mortal wound business. This time, a little more specific, wounded by the sword and yet lived. But notice too that now are they not only worshiping the beast, but they're worshiping images of the beast, whoever the beast is or whatever the beast is. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast now becomes a very important symbol. Whoever the beast is has been made into images, and the people are persecuted if they don't worship the image of the beast. So we're getting a picture of a worship object, a blasphemous worship object, very powerful. It's useless to fight against it. It controls the nations, and it's one that is now the source of martyrdom and persecution for the Christians. So we turn back to the text. Causes this image to speak and to cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. Either one. Doesn't say one or, says one or the other. The name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast. Now what this means is you have to know the code language here in order to understand this. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it's a human number, and its number is 666. But you notice a little G here in this RSV text. That tells you that certain ancient manuscripts read 616 here instead of 666. Now let's reflect on this a little bit before we go to chapter 17. This talks about the mark of the beast being put on people. And if you have the mark of the beast on you, and the mark might be the name or it might be the number of the beast, well then that marks you for destruction. You're the slave of the beast. That's an old custom. Romans were allowed to brand their slaves if they ran away and they were captured again. And they branded their slaves either on the forehead or the back of their hand, because those are the two parts of the body that are never covered by clothing. Therefore you can always see the brand mark. The brand mark is the mark of the owner or the slave. So this reference to the mark of the beast being put on the forehead or the back of the hand is a reference to the custom in Roman slavery customs, the custom of showing who your owner is. If the beast is your owner, then you're marked for destruction. And the mark of the beast is 666 or 616. But the most ancient manuscripts, and more of them, have 666 instead of 616. Yet there's some confusion here. Now so far we've gotten a number of clues together. We'll see some of these same clues appearing in chapter 17 and some new ones appearing. So let's turn now to chapter 17 to see what it will have to say to us about the identity of the beast. We won't begin at the beginning because we read earlier this first part about the woman, and we saw that the woman was identified as the great city which rules the earth. Presumably then Rome. So we're coming closer to a Roman Empire understanding of the beast. But this isn't yet certain. It's just that we're coming closer. Now we pick up the theme here where we left off before. I saw her, I marveled greatly, but the angel said to me, why marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, which he does in the end of this chapter, and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her. And that's what we're interested in. We want to know the mystery of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her. Now here's some more clues. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to perdition. That's a strange clue. The beast was and is not. Let's hold on to that because it will be repeated in a different way, a little more accurately, shortly. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to behold the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. Now that's a parody in a sense on the phrase used earlier for God, the eternal one, where God is present, past, and future. This beast is past but not present, and yet future. So the beast is past and future but not present. And that's a clue. This calls for a mind with wisdom. That means a mind that knows the meaning of these code words. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. The woman is the great city that rules the earth. We all know that Rome was built on 7 hills. So this is apparently a reference to the 7 heads being the 7 hills on which the city is built. But here's another meaning for the 7 heads. The 7 heads also stand for 7 kings. They didn't have kings in the Roman Empire days, they had emperors. But kings and emperors are parallel words here. 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain only a little while. That attempts to place the dating of the book in the reign of the 6th king. 5 of them have fallen. 1 of them is, and another one, there's only supposed to be 1 more, hadn't come yet, and when he comes, he must remain only a little while. That's what the 7 heads stand for, the 7 hills and the 7 rulers. As for the beast that was and is not, that's the 3rd time, was and is not and is to come. That's the way it was in the middle one. has a past but no present, and yet has a future. It is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven. There's another clue. It's an eighth but belongs to the seven, and it goes to perdition. Then the 10 horns that you have seen are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. They are of one mind. They will give over their power and authority to the beast. Now we have a strange little reference to these 10 kings. They're represented by the 10 horns on the 7 heads of this beast, with the 7 heads. Now it seems pretty clear that the beast is representing the Roman Empire, and the 7 heads are the 7 emperors of the Roman Empire that were on the throne in the 1st century. But there's this mysterious reference to an 8th one, who's one of the 7. And this 8th one is described, along with the beast, as one who was and is not and is to come. So you have a curious set of references blended together here. The whole clues are finished up in this way then. These 10 kings will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And you have an explanation of the 10 kings down here as well, but we read that earlier already. Now let's reflect a bit on these clues. These clues seem to tell us that the meaning of the beast has something to do with the Roman Empire. Now if you take the Roman emperors of the 1st century and begin to study them to see if they fit any of these clues, you can start most easily with the way in which one of the heads is described as having a mortal wound and yet didn't die. And one of its heads has this special number, 666. That's its human number. That's where we'll start. We'll try to understand what the 666 means and then go from there to all the other clues. In order to do that, we have to know something about ancient times. In ancient languages, some of the languages have a number system, like the Romans. The Romans have a letter system and a number system. We still use Roman numerals. But some of the languages in the ancient world did not have any numbers. If a language system doesn't have any numbers, then it has to use some other system's numbers, or it can use its letters as numbers. English, for example, is a language system which has no numbers. Therefore, we sometimes use our letters as numbers. We talk about point A and point B and point C and point D, using those as numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it gets awkward if we try to get big numbers using letters, and so we've borrowed from the Romans their system. We still use Roman numerals for some purposes, and we borrowed from the Arabs at an earlier stage their numerals. We commonly call these Arabic numerals, and we've learned to use those as though they were our own. English is the first example of a language system which borrowed numbers and also, in a rudimentary way, used its letters as numbers. Now, Hebrew and Greek are language systems that don't have any numbers. But they did not borrow anybody else's number systems. They used their whole alphabet as numbers. That means that every letter in the Hebrew alphabet and every letter in the Greek alphabet has a numerical value. And if you wish to express a certain number, you have to use the letters which add up to make that number. Then you have to make some kind of a special mark in the text to show that you're using those letters in order to express a number. It's a little awkward, but it worked in antiquity, and we have to see how the author of the book of Revelation, in arriving at the human number for this beast, came up with 666 or 616. That is, the letters of the name of this beast, when added together properly in Greek or Hebrew, which has no number systems, adds up to 666 or 616. So realizing this, the scholars of the 19th century tried all the Roman emperors. Began with Augustus and went to Tiberius and went to Caligula, and then after him Claudius, and after him Nero, and then came Vespasian, and then Titus, and finally Domitian, and the century is over. Those are the 1st century emperors. They took each of these names and they tried to fit it in to what the book of Revelation was saying about the kings, and none of them fit. They don't fit no matter how you juggle them around, whether you use initials or titles or whatever else, until you come to number 5. When you come to emperor number 5, Nero, you find something that fits. Now let's look at the Hebrew alphabet briefly, just to see its numerical equivalents first. And this is not something that you need to know or to remember. It's something you need to be aware of so that you can see more clearly how scholarship has identified the beast and the way in which we're doing it now. Look at the Hebrew alphabet. It has 22 letters beginning with Aleph and then Beth and then Gimel and Daleth and so forth. And these are on a base 10 system, if you understand modern mathematics, so that the first letter is 1, and the second letter is 2, and the third is 3, and so on till you get down to 10. Then the next letter is 20, and then that proceeds by tens until you get to 100, and then the next letter is 200, and then the next is 300, and the alphabet ends at 400. If you wanted to express a number then that was 450, you take the letter for 400 and the letter for 50 and put them together, and that would be the letter 450. Or if you wanted to express 15, you take the letter for 10 and the letter for 5 and put them together and add them together, and that would be the number 15. It goes without saying then, if you understand this system, that every word in Hebrew has a numerical equivalent. Every word in Hebrew can be turned into a number by taking the number value of each letter and adding them all together. Not only can every word have a number value, but every name has a number value. Abraham, Isaac, Joshua, any of the names in the Bible can be added up as numbers, and that's the human number. Whoever the beast is has a human number of 666. Has letters in the name that add up to 666. When we got to Nero, the scholars in the 19th century, this has been done a long time ago, the scholars in the 19th century realized that if they took the Emperor Nero and then added to his name his major title, emperor, then they could come up with a solution to this. Let's look briefly at how this works mathematically now. Here is the name written in Greek of Nero Caesar. Caesar is the word for emperor in Greek. Now these are Greek letters, even though some of them look like they're English letters. N-E-R, that looks like a P, but that's the Greek rho, an R. N-E-R-O-N. K-A-I-S, that's a funny letter we don't have anymore, but that's the sigma of the Greek world, and this is the S. A-R, Caesar. There's the Greek form, Neron Caesar. If you take that form and spell it out in Hebrew letters, now Greek runs this way, like our languages, but Hebrew runs this way. So the N for Neron is way over here, and the R for Neron is here. Hebrew is a non-vowel alphabet. You have only consonants. It's a consonantal language. So you have only the consonants here. KSR, KSR. When you spell this out in Hebrew the way they did in ancient times, and then you begin to add up the numerical value of each of these letters, which you can do this way. Here's the first letter, N, a nu, and here it is here. Here's the second one, a resh, and it's here. And you look over here and consult this chart, you'll see that this N is the letter for 50. So you put 50 by this one, and you see the resh is the letter for 200, and the vav is the letter for 6, this one. And then you have another nun written in a different form because it's at the end of a word. This letter and this are the same letter, and N, it's also another 50. Then you have these letters KSR, Kaiser, Emperor. And the Kof is worth 100 in the number system, and the Samach is worth 60, and the Resh is another 200. This Resh and this Resh are the same. So the 200 is the same here. And lo and behold, if you write Neron Kaiser in Hebrew and add up the number value, you have 666, the human number of the Emperor Nero. Now that explains the likelihood that the author is giving us a clue here that tells us that the beast he's talking about, one of the heads of this beast, was the Emperor Nero. Now you have still to deal with those ancient texts that have 616 instead of 666. So let's look at the bottom of this chart finally for this. If you spell it in Latin instead of in Greek, this is Greek, this is Latin now, N-E-R-O-K-A-I-S-A-R, and then put these Latin letters into Hebrew, it's exactly the same as it was, except that there's no N on the end here. Neiron. This N should not be there now. That's a mistake in transcription, which I did. But nevertheless, if you do that, you will see this N, which is worth 50, is taken off of this, and that gives us the answer 616. So it depends on which way you go as to whether you get the number 616 or 666, but in either case you wind up with Nero Caesar. Now we've got to the point where we begin to see that the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns is really a subtle but a well-known reference to the Roman Empire. And with that, we come to a fresh realization that this book is talking about the events of its own time. Now we'll have to develop that a little in our next and last session, but for now we've learned a very important trait. Apocalyptic books are not written for the distant future, they're written for their own time. They're prophesying that the end is near, it must come soon, and the end will take place in the lifetime of this author. We have to deal with problems that raises, but we'll do that when we come back again for our last session. Now let's discuss some of the implications of what we've been doing. How do you respond personally to the probability that the prophecies of Revelation are Roman Empire prophecies that did not come true? The end of the world did not happen. The end of history didn't happen. The general resurrection of the dead did not happen. The last judgment didn't happen. None of those things happened. How do you respond to the probability that these are really Roman Empire prophecies that didn't come true? Then secondly, why do you think the book of Revelation is popular in hard times? For it is. Every time great catastrophe comes upon Christians, book of Revelation achieves a new popularity. Why is that? We'll touch on this in our discussion in our last session. And then finally, what special values do you see in this book? We've not talked about the values at all yet, but there are some special values here, and you may have some ideas on this that will anticipate what we'll do with this in our next session. Our next and last session will deal with some of these issues, and we'll see you all then.